Boys and girls, we are back to Snow Treasure, where we left off. The commandant was checking out, was starting to kick over the snowman. He was getting frustrated because he's still looking for that soldier. And anyway, when that happened, Peter threw a snowball at him and hit him right in the head. Let's see how that goes over. I don't think that guy would be a fan of that activity. So let's see how this goes. Chapter 28. There he goes! After him! Peter had little chance to escape. Lieutenants sit down, and almost his whole company were chasing him. But Peter knew these woods, and the foreigners did not. He hoped to cross the snake above where it was narrower and take the ski trail up the mountain. In the forest above, he had a good chance to hide, but he was cut off before he could get upstream far enough to cross. The Germans spread out in a circle and blocked all points. Peter felt like a rabbit facing a pack of hounds. Rough arms were all around him, and he fell to the ground. There was a tussle, and Peter all but succeeded in throwing off his captor. But the others came up, and he was one against many, a boy surrounded by men. There was nothing to do but submit. They dragged him to his feet. He fell in step with them. They were marching him off to their barracks. But the snowball trick had worked. He had succeeded in distracting the commandant. The outrage of being snowballed by a Norwegian boy was enough to make him forget the lesson he was giving Lovisa, showing her how the Norse would be treated by the German conquerors. And so he had not uncovered the gold that had been buried beneath the very snowman that he was kicking. Smart move. By the way, this is Peter being taken away by the German soldiers. Yes, the snowball trick had worked. When Peter was led back to the place between the two fallen trees, he saw the commandant was leaving. The snowmen were still standing, and the children were filing out of the snake. Peter did not mind being a German prisoner if he had saved the gold. How much of this had Uncle Victor seen? He wondered. No doubt every bit of it. But could he do anything to help him? Frightened as he was, not knowing what was going to happen, he still didn't want any aid from his Uncle Victor. His uncle's only concern was to get the gold out of Norway. If he did that, it was all that anyone could expect of him. But Uncle Victor wasn't the only one to let a fellow down, Peter knew. He had always been ready to help others before. But in a case like this, with so much, the money, maybe even their own lives involved, Peter didn't think his uncle could do much. A soldier marched on his right and one to his left. Ahead and behind were others. When they reached the sentries, these sprang up, their rifles on their shoulders. So they were quite a little company when they turned into the barracks they had built before the fishing wharf. The heavy boots of the Nazis clumped in rhythm over the wooden boards of the barracks floor. Thump, 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 thump. Down a long hallway they pounded. Then they stopped. Peter was shoved in a box of a room no bigger than a clothes closet. A key was turned in the door. Then the thump, thump, thump of the soldiers as they left him alone in the twilight. He stumbled against something like a low shelf. It was supposed to be his bed, he guessed. There was a window at one end of the tiny room. It was barred. Through it, he could see the beach, snow-covered to the very edge of the black, lapping water. Through the snow, the sentry stepped up and down, his legs swinging straight out from his hips, like those of a toy soldier wound up by a key. What were they going to do with him? Peter wondered. Would he be tried at a court-martial? Up past the window stepped the sentry. Then he turned and followed his own footsteps back to the direction he had come. Was it a serious offense to snowball a high German officer? Peter believed it was. It had something to do with order and respect for authority. Well, he didn't care how serious it was. They could shoot him if they liked. He was glad he had thrown that snowball. Would even the Germans put a boy to death? He couldn't be sure. From the stories of what they did in Poland, he could believe almost anything. Still, these Germans in Norway didn't seem so bad. The captain who had gone away and moved his troops out of their sled track, and they had all been very decent and had kept to themselves, and had not even raided the food supplies as they had with other countries. They had all been very friendly except this commandant. But even he had offered to have an orderly help Mrs. Lundstrom pull the sled on which Bunny and the others sat on thousands of kroner of gold. But John's story of Poland kept coming back, of how they had turned the people out of their houses and had taken the priest off the altar at Mass. When he thought of Jean, his mouth was hot and dry again, for whether or not he was in serious trouble for having snowballed the commandant, he knew he would be if it were known he had seen the escaped Pole. Lovisa said there was a notice on the school door saying that anyone who found to know something about him and not telling would be punished by death. By death. How cold it was in the barracks. Even in his windbreaker and heavy outdoors clothes, he felt cold. His teeth were coming together and apart like hammers. The sun had gone down, and there was only a dim gray light coming from the inside. It seemed to be raining. Maybe that was why it was so dark so early. Anyway, the northern afternoon was over. Outside, it all seemed so wet and sad. Down here by the fishing pier. After a time, a soldier came to the door. He brought Peter a deep dish of stew and some dark bread. The soldier spoke to him. I come back to get your dish. Then I will take you to the commandant, he said in German. Peter couldn't eat. He tried to, but it was of no use. Later, there were footsteps in the hall. A key turned. The time was up. The soldier had come to take him to the commandant. He stepped into the cell. Even in the dim light, Peter could tell it was not the same soldier. Oh boy. Chapter 29. Well, all right. 2 chapters left, boys and girls. All right, just a few pages. All right. Chapter 29. The soldier came inside and shut the door and leaned against it. Peter looked hard at him. He could see so little from the streak of light from the window, but there was something familiar. The soldier was Jean Lasik, the Pole. But no, that couldn't be. Jean was on Uncle Victor's boat in the Snake. Peter had seen him there that day. Shh. Jean put his finger to his lips. From his tunic pocket, he dug a scrap of paper. It was so dark, Peter had to go over and over it before he could make it out. It was a note from Uncle Victor. Peter read, Jean Lasik is risking his liberty and perhaps his life for you. Follow him at all costs. Wherever he goes, on that depends your safety and his. There was no signature, but Peter knew well his uncle's bold handwriting. He nodded to show he understood. Jean kept listening for a sound. What he was waiting for, Peter dared not ask. From afar, Peter could make out kind of din, a rattle like of knives and forks and pans and mugs. When the rattle became much louder, Jean seemed satisfied. He looked out the door, he stepped outside and closed it. When he came back into the cell, there was a high excitement in his whisper. Come now, he said, quickly. They were out in the hall. Jean stopped to turn the key in the lock outside the door where Peter had been kept prisoner. Into his pocket went the key. Now Peter could hear the tramp, tramp, tramp of boots. It came from a distant end of the barracks, but it grew noisier with each step. We'll have to run, Jean whispered. All the time the sound of the marching soldiers came closer. They seemed to be coming down a hall that would meet the corridor at right angles. And now Peter could hear nothing but the sound. Nothing because of sound in his own ears. He wanted to run in the opposite direction. Why go this way, he wondered. We'll only run into them. The marching men must be nearing the corner. But Jean only kept going faster towards them. Uncle Victor said he was to follow Jean at all costs, so behind him ran the breathless, frightened Peter. And now, on the right, Peter saw a door. Through it, Jean pulled him. There was just time to close it softly. The Germans were turning the corner, as Peter could tell by the sound of the steps on the other side of the door. Peter fell into the wet snow of the beach. They were outside the barracks, and for the moment at least, safe. Jean flattened himself against the wall of the building, and Peter stood up beside him. The shadow of the barracks hid them. The rain was loud and on the crusted snow. We're lucky the sentry was going up the beach, not down, Jean whispered. Otherwise, he would have seen the light when we opened the door. Peter felt a throbbing in his ears. He tried not to pant, but his breath was loud. Now there was another soft pod. More marching against the snow. They could see a dark figure. It was a sentry coming. It was the sentry. He walked up to a point on a line with the door, the very door over which he stood guard. He was not 10 feet away from where Jean and Peter were flattened against the wall. Slap, slap, slap! His heavy leather mittens thumped his shoulders. He changed his rifle from one side to the other and changed it back again. Then he turned and began goose-stepping back in the direction he had come. Jean tugged at Peter's sleeve. It was now or never, he seemed to say. Peter was not prepared for what happened next. Jean led him down the beach to the very edge of the fjord and then into the water itself. The cold water bit his body. The breath left him. He didn't think he could stand another minute of it. He wanted to run back to the beach, but Jean kept wading out, and Peter, remembering the warning in the note, found himself following him. It seemed forever these minutes they waited in the water. And now Jean was swimming, and Peter found himself doing the same. But you couldn't swim in that close to frozen water. You had no strength. Peter felt the breath going out of him. But somehow or other, it seemed better to freeze to death out here than to stay in those barracks and wait for no one knew what. Then there was a numbness over him. He closed his eyes. He must be dreaming, for nothing like this could happen in real life. A hand reached out and grabbed his arm, and he was pulled into a boat. Someone put a flask to his mouth and told him to drink, but the fiery stuff made him sputter, and it ran down over his chin. A heavy coat was put over him, and a pair of arms were cradling him. Rolls. Uncle Victor's mate was holding him. There was another sodden mass on the bottom of the boat. It was Jean Lasik. Peter heard them say his name. But now he found he was beyond caring about anything. The boat he knew was the Clang Pearson's lifeboat. Strong arms were pulling it toward the fishing smack. And that is one chapter left, boys and girls, and we will do that tomorrow. All right, we got a few pages left. Let's see how this goes. All right, have a great day.